Hi guys, welcome to lecture 1 in a series on cell growth and division. So cells grow and divide all the time. In this GIF you can see I think it's a frog embryo undergoing a process called gastrulation. So one cell divides into 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 8, etc., etc. Shows an exponential growth or increase in numbers. And go from one cell to, I don't know, 70 trillion pretty fast. So why do cells divide? Take a couple minutes to respond to the following questions here on your outline. I guess we already did that in class. Anyway, give us an example of when cells need to divide, an example of cells divide in your body. Of course, how is cancer related to cell division? We'll come back to cancer a little bit later. So, a couple of reasons for cells to divide. One is they've gotten too big. Big's not great. One of the things cells need is a high surface area to volume ratio. And you get the large surface to area volume ratios in small cells. So once a cell gets too big, it has to divide. Another reason is that's how organisms grow. Organisms grow not by having their cells get bigger, but by adding new cells. And of course, you guys are adding lots of cells all the time now as adolescents. Last but not least, another reason to divide is to replace cells that have died. Cells do have a limited timeline. There's something called a Hayflick limit. I think the number's like 46 times. Different cells last for different periods of times, but there is a limit to how long cells live unless you're a cancer cell. Cancer cells are often described as immortal. So, cells can divide often or never. Lots of the cells in your brain don't undergo division. The old axiom is that you're born with all the brain cells you have. That's not really true. You do make new brain cells, and you guys are making all kinds of new brain cells as you grow. But there are certainly cells in your brain that don't undergo lots of cell division over the course of your whole lifetime. We call the process of cell division, or we used to call it mitosis, okay? Now we call it the cell cycle. And so the cell cycle is divided up into, look here, 1, 2, 3, 4 divisions, okay? And we call these first 3 parts of the cell cycle interphase. Then I go into mitosis and then cytokinesis. We're going to talk about those in very specific terms. And we could say, well, what kind of cells in humans are rarely dividing? Well, again, brain cells. What kind of cells in humans divide often? Well, look under your bed. All those dust bunnies, what are they made up of? 75% of those dust bunnies is made up of skin cells. So here's another diagram of the cell cycle. It's made up of these 5 phases, G1 or GAP1, S for synthesis, G2, GAP2, sometimes called growth 2, mitosis, and then cytokinesis. And there are checkpoints here that are represented by the production of specific proteins. G1, the first step is just normal cell growth. As a cell grows, it gets larger and larger. It accumulates more and more materials until it gets to be too big. That is, when the surface area to volume ratio has gotten too small. Once that limit in size has been reached, certain proteins are made, and they characterize this G to S checkpoint. And then the cell moves into S for synthesis, and that's when DNA replication occurs. We're going to learn about that in some detail in our next unit, but DNA is replicated during S. Finally, the cell will move from S once the DNA is replicated and prepare for cell division. And so some of the things that's happening here is there's a large production of the microtubules and microfilaments that are going to make up the structure called the mitotic spindle. We also have certain organelles that are going to be doubled up. You can imagine as this cell prepares to divide into 2, it's going to need additional organelles. In mitosis, we have nuclear division. We're going to look at the stages of mitosis in detail. And then finally, cytokinesis represents when the cells actually divide into two complete whole new cells. Before we do that, let's talk about DNA. DNA, as we will learn about in the next chapter, is organized into large bundles called chromatin. Okay, so we studied DNA briefly. Remember, it's an alpha double helix made of nucleotides. That long-stranded molecule, 3 billion base pairs long, gets wrapped around these proteins called histones, kind of like the string on a yo-yo. So together, histones and DNA are called chromatin or chromatin. You know, individually, a histone wrapped around some DNA is called a nucleosome, and these things all can undergo condensation during the cell cycle, during the cell part of the cell cycle called mitosis. So normally I can't see my DNA; it's just kind of hanging out, associated with these histone proteins. But as a cell decides it's going to undergo cell division, this DNA condenses into structure called chromosomes. Chromosome, chroma means dark, soma means body, and so I see these dark bodies only during mitosis. The DNA, the chromatin, undergoes supercoiling, condensing, wrapping around itself, actually protecting itself until I finally see these bodies. Now the language for chromosomes and genetics is kind of confusing. So here's some chromosomes, these things that look like X's. Here's two sister chromatids joined together at the centromere. Wait a minute. Here's some chromosomes too. They're not like X's, they're individual pieces of DNA. And these are also called chromosomes. It's a little confusing. We'll keep using the language, you'll get better with it. Anyway, I have a number of chromosomes, and the human chromosome number is 23. Okay, so we have 23 different chromosomes. However, if you'll recollect, we get 2 copies of each of these chromosomes. I have a chromosome number 1, a chromosome number 2, chromosome number 3, 4, 5, 6. Look, they're ordered. What's the difference between chromosome number 1 and chromosome number 22? Well, it's size. Here's another thing. I've got 2 copies of chromosome number 1. Where did they come from? Well, this copy came from my mom, and that came from my dad. I get 2 copies of chromosome 2, one from mom, one from dad, etc., etc., etc. And these are all homologous chromosomes. They're all called autosomes until I get to here, the 23rd pair, and these guys are called sex chromosomes. So the pairs 1 through 22, homologous chromosomes, are the same, sort of. They all have the same genes on them, though the codes, the alleles for those genes may be different. And then in the 23rd pair, I have sex chromosomes, and they determine your gender. So, who is this person here? What gender are they? I can't tell from looking at the autosomes, but if I look down here, notice this person has a Y chromosome and an X chromosome. So this is the karyotype. These are the chromosomes necessary to be a male. If I had 2 X's, this would be the karyotype for a female. Karyotype's a picture of chromosomes. Which of these chromosomes has more genes on it? Remember, I have about 21,000 genes on these 23 pairs of chromosomes. Let's say it's 23,000 genes on 23 chromosomes. That means there'd be about 1,000 genes on every chromosome. But does this chromosome have more genes than this chromosome? Sure it does. It's bigger. Same here. Which of these has more chromosomes? Well, the Y chromosome only has a few genes. X has like 3,000 genes on it. So is it harder to be a boy or a girl? The answer is it's harder to be a dude. So be nice to dudes. Look, your chromosome number gives you identity. If you have 23 pairs of chromosomes, that is, if you have 46 chromosomes, you're a normal human, whatever normal means. But different organisms have different number of chromosomes. For instance, the elephant and the rhino. Who wins in a fight? Look at that. This rhino, just saw him throw a tree, so I think the rhino's backing off. In fact, rhinos and elephants are often do combat one another, and I think elephants actually kill rhinos. Elephant has 56 chromosomes. Rhino 82. How about here? Hillbilly versus the carp. I'm sorry, I guess he's a noodler. If I had stayed in Oklahoma City as a kid, I would have been a noodler too. Carp, 104 chromosomes. Noodler, hopefully 46. Similarly, who's got more? Carmen Miranda or the pineapple? Pineapple, 50. Carmen Miranda, 46. She's somebody from back when I was a kid. How about the death adder fern or adder tongues fern? 1,200 chromosomes. My point here being that your chromosome number doesn't necessarily indicate how complex you are. Who has more chromosomes? The king cobra or the dude in love with king cobra? King cobra, 38. Dude kissing king cobra, 46. Shrimp versus Forrest Gump. Shrimp have 92, Forrest Gump only 46. What's twice as many chromosomes in a shrimp? Last but not least, Bieber. How many chromosomes? Nobody knows. I don't know. I shouldn't make fun of Justin Bieber. I guess that's kind of like passe, isn't it? Do you even know who Justin Bieber is? Okay. Well, we talk about cells in terms of their chromosome number, and we say diploid cells are 2n. Now recollect, n for humans is 23, so diploid cells are 2 times n or 46. That is, they have 46 chromosomes because they have 2 copies of each chromosome. We call these diploid cells somatic cells. They're all the cells in your body. Soma means body. So all the somatic cells are diploid cells. Things like nerve cells, muscle cells, and you can see some cool illustrations here of some somatic cells. Right? These are neurons. You can see this. This is actually cardiac tissue that it's contracting spontaneously. And, when you're a little baby, when your mom's sperm meets the egg, after just a few weeks, maybe 3 or 4 weeks, you start to have tissue that starts to beat like a heart. Just a few weeks in. And you're really not much more than a ball of cells at that point. We also have haploid cells. Haploid cells are unique. They are 1n. 1 times n is 23. Haploid cells have 23 chromosomes, and they are the gametes, like sperms and eggs. So sperm and eggs are unique because they have only half the normal chromosomal complement. That is half the normal chromosomes. Well, remember, there's lots of reasons for cells to divide. And we're going to look at eukaryotic cell division, but first let's talk about bacteria. Remember that bacteria simply divide into 2. This is not sexual reproduction. This is asexual reproduction. The bacterium has this circular DNA, circular chromosomes. It doubles that CCC DNA, and then it just splits into 2 cells. We call this process binary fission. I have a parent cell that makes 2 daughter cells, which should be genetically identical. That is, their DNA should be identical from the parent, although they have high mutation rates, which makes them able to sort of adapt to their environments. Asexual reproduction, binary fission. The disadvantage is that the daughters should be identical to the parents, which makes it difficult for those organisms to adapt to environmental changes. However, if the environment's the same, you might be perfectly adapted. The truth is, who's more successful on the planet? Us or them? The prokaryotes or the eukaryotes? I think the prokaryotes outnumber us by large numbers. Which brings us to cell division in eukaryotes. And remember that the first 3 phases of the cell cycle, G1, S, and G2, are all part of what's called interphase. Well, when we get to mitosis, we talk about prophase, metaphase, anaphase, telophase, and finally cytokinesis. And I'll save that for the next lecture.